The rain had a way of rewriting the city every hour. On the glass of Thomas Vale's office window, the neon signs smeared into long crimson smears that matched the cursors blinking on his screen. He was an accountant by trade, patient, small-minded in the best ways, the sort of person who lived by routine and reconciled other people's chaos to a tidy balance. Palisade Freight was a difficult client, a mid-tier logistics outfit with enough paperwork to look respectable and enough irregularities to make an auditor curious. Thomas had been handed the files because the old bookkeeper had retired suddenly, the phrase a polite grave. He clicked through spreadsheets and scanned invoices until he found the tab tucked behind an innocuous set of payrolls, CRLEDGER. The password cracked with the familiarity of a lock he'd picked once too often in freelance work. The ledger that opened was not a ledger at all. It was a map in red ink, columns of names, dates, addresses, payments recorded under euphemisms, a tally column labeled due. Some entries were crossed out in black. Others had a crimson smear beside them that looked very much like the mark a careful man would make if he meant finality. The names were not random. A deputy mayor, 2 city inspectors, a few property managers, a handful of small-time owners who'd been squeezed into contracts. Thomas sat very still, the office suddenly loud with the smell of wet concrete from the street below. This is not mine, he thought inwardly, and at once he knew the truth that settles like a stone. He had found a book that others would kill to protect. For 2 days he did what accountants do with things they are not supposed to see. He read. He cross-checked vendor numbers, tracked ghost companies, traced routing codes to shell facilities with no loading docks on desolate industrial streets. He made copies on encrypted drives. He printed a version and tucked one under a loose floorboard at home. And he told no one, except, on the second night, to the one person he trusted enough to risk a single reckless conversation. His old college roommate, Jenna Mora, who ran a small investigative beat for a local paper. "If this is what it looks like," Jenna said after she scanned the ledger in a single raw hour in his cramped kitchen, "it's a mob ledger. Not just mischief, organized graft, payoffs, protection. It's bloody, Tom." He remembered the first-person confession that unfurled in his head then, a private truth. I shouldn't have opened it. But he had opened it, and opening had a way of making you proprietorial. You could not unread the world you read. Jenna's eyes were hard with a kind of hunger that made him feel both safer and more exposed. "You go to the cops," she said. "You go to the FBI." Thomas found himself saying, almost involuntarily, "I don't trust the cops in Palisade," which was true in the way some fears are, rooted in rumor, fed by small coincidences. He would not go to them yet. He wanted evidence that nobody could bury with a phone call and a padded envelope. When the ledger's existence leaked, and it had the awkward habit of doing that even when Thomas kept it buried, the reaction arrived like a series of wet footsteps at the door. His office was cleared by men in suits who first pretended to be auditors, then inspectors, and finally anything else the story demanded. They asked questions in monotone, the sort of monotone used to locate a panic point and press. He danced around them with the practiced calm of a man who had reconciled numbers for years, but he saw, in their eyes, a flicker of recognition that was not curiosity. He found his name in a surveillance log the following morning. A grainy picture showed a man entering the building at the same time he had been there. Someone else had been in the building that day. Someone who did not work for Palisade. Thomas slept poorly, his dreams threaded with columns of numbers that bled like runny ink. He started carrying one encrypted drive on his person, the other in the safety deposit box of a bank whose manager he'd known since childhood. It comforted him slightly to have 2 copies of the ledger and not trust either. If they come for this, they'll come with violence, he thought in an ugly, practical tone. He began to notice cars with tinted windows where there had never been cars before. Men leaning on lampposts in ways that suggested they were listening. And once, in the fluorescent supermarket aisle as he reached for canned tomatoes, a hand brushed his wrist in a touch so deliberate he felt it as a message. "We know." Jenna pressed him to move faster. "You can't sit on this," she said, voice low in the crowded back room of a coffee shop. "If the ledger points to people who are entrenched, you have to go public in a way that can't be erased." He had half a plan. Go to a trustworthy federal agent Jenna had cultivated, arrange for the ledger to be used as the backbone of an investigation, and secure immunity and relocation in exchange for testimony. The federal agent's office was a cramped room smelling of reheated coffee and paper, and the pitch was procedural. Gather more corroboration, set the trap, roll up the operation at once. "We can't expose the ledger without a team," the agent said. "You understand the risk, Mr. Vale." Thomas did. He had never imagined his life beyond the rhythm of receipts and late nights untangling payroll disasters. And yet here he was, chest tight with the knowledge that other people's sins had become his property. "I do," he said. "But if you wait, someone will open their mouth and the ledger will burn." The agent's answer contained the softest of cold truths. "Someone will get hurt before we can prove anything." That sentence moved through him like a cold wind. The manhunt that followed was not cinematic in the way movies make it. There were no high-speed chases through downtown, no rooftop showdowns. It was methodical and cruel in a way that practiced men understand. The mob boss, an old hand named Marco D'Angelo, who ran a patchwork of protection, construction extortion, and municipal bribery, did what any organized crime leader does when a ledger threatens his equilibrium. He sent others to find it, and he closed ranks. Marco's enforcers were efficient and patient. They shadowed Thomas to a subway stop. They made a half-hearted attempt at his safety deposit box by sending a man to pose as a bank clerk and get the key. And they began to leak hints that someone who kept lists like Thomas did should be careful of acquaintances. Jenna started receiving subtle threats. A rose left on her desk with a paperclip attached to the stem. A photograph slid under her apartment door of her car parked across from a desolate block with the caption, "We see you." Thomas noticed his phone cricketing with anonymous messages, some offering cash to hand over the ledger, and others promising a quicker way out. He refused every offer. "I can't," he told Jenna once, pulling at the collar of his coat like a man pulling at a noose. "If I hand it over, I hand them the map." She looked at him as if she wanted to shake him, to wake him from the kind of reasonable fantasy people tell themselves to avoid being paralyzed by fear. "Do you want to be the man who did nothing while they burned the city?" she demanded. He did not answer with words. Instead, he laid out copies encrypted across multiple accounts, uploaded fragments to secure servers, and planned, with the federal agent, a slow grind that would leave as little exposed blood on the street as possible. Even the slow grind has an appetite. Someone betrayed him from the inside, whether a minor player who craved leniency or a neighborhood friend who had been shaken by fear. Thomas never learned. And one January night, a truck pulled up outside his building. They smashed his office, tore up drawers, slashed the carpet with knives as if they were marking territory, and they left figures carved into the wood like signatures. They did not find the safety deposit key hidden in the false bottom of his sock drawer, but they found the copy he had printed and tucked in a folder beneath a loose floorboard. That discovery turned the ledger from a threat to a target. It became a story worth killing for. He fled that night, carrying only two things: the encrypted drive he wore on a chain and a single printed page folded small in his pocket, the page with 3 names circled in crimson like a bleeding eye. He went to a motel on the edge of the city, one of those places with thin walls where the heating hummed and televisions glowed blue. He did not sleep. He thought, in first person ungraciously, "I can't run. I can only hide cleverly." But hiding is a temporary geometry, and soon enough an internal probe, a leak, a casual scanner of plates put his location on a list. The ledger's final transition from private danger to public reckoning came with a decision that felt like both betrayal and liberation. Thomas, Jenna, and the federal team set up a controlled release, a sting where an informant would pretend to buy the ledger, while hundreds of copies were simultaneously disseminated to trusted national newsrooms and encrypted caches. The plan, elegant on paper, splintered in execution. The buyer turned out to be one of Marco D'Angelo's lieutenants in disguise, and the exchange that should have been a quick pass turned violent in an empty parking lot behind a strip mall. Jenna was hit in the chaos. She survived, but not without cost. A fractured wrist and the sort of tremor that does not pass with time. Thomas felt the whole scene age him in an instant. He and the agent had anticipated leaks, yet nothing had prepared them for the street-level ferocity when men whose livelihoods depended on secrecy smelled exposure. But even as the violence blossomed, the copies moved. Files uploaded to servers in other countries, screenshots forwarded to prosecutors' desks, encrypted torrents seeded across the web. The ledger ceased to be a single object. It became 100,000 objects, earned truth that could not be burnt in one arson. There was no tidy courtroom flair to the aftermath either. Arrests came, some dramatic with handcuffs and cameras, others quiet with sealed indictments and plea bargains. Marco D'Angelo did not go to jail immediately. His lawyers moved like the men they were, buying time, spinning narratives about legitimate business disputes and political vendettas. But his circle frayed. The deputy mayor resigned under scandal. Construction contracts were rescinded. A handful of small-time officials took immunity deals in exchange for testimony that traced the ledger's entries to wire transfers and bribe deliveries. The city convulsed with hearings and hearings of hearings, a long bureaucratic boil that left neighborhoods raw but cleaner. Thomas watched from the thin safety of relocation that the federal program arranged. He took a new name, a new flat, and the brittle wry comfort of a life without the rhythm of other people's ledgers. He visited Jenna in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. She met his new anonymous face with a quiet smile and the kind of fatigue that has earned you small mercies. "You did it," she told him once, voice half hushed, half proud. He was not sure how to answer. The ledger had done what ledgers always do. It turned the invisible into a narrative. It turned accusation into paper. In the end, Thomas kept waking with a sense that he had betrayed something as much as he had saved it. He had pulled a single thread and watched an entire secret unravel, and in doing so he had broken lives and perhaps saved others. He had, too, paid privately. People he had known at work no longer returned his calls. His mother, frightened by the news, had refused to visit. He thought often in first person about small things. "I miss the consoling arithmetic of numbers that add up," he would say to himself on the kitchen table in his new apartment. The ledger lived on in public archives and in endless court exhibits, in 1,000 printed pages thumbed through by prosecutors and 1,000 digital copies that could not be quietly erased. Marco D'Angelo's empire was bruised and rebuilding in shadows that the law would watch more closely. Jenna kept writing. The city learned to be more attentive, not entirely because of goodwill, but because the risk of exposure had increased. Thomas had wanted to be an anonymous man who balanced books and left other people's sins to other people. Instead, he had become an axis in a violent, messy story that had no rewards but the practical one of fewer quiet crimes. He sometimes walked the wet streets at night and thought of the crimson smears on his office window and how they had, in the end, mirrored the ledger's ink. Bright, hard to ignore, and a reminder that when numbers become human, they can very quickly become dangerous.